The day I discovered my son had stolen $1.3 million from me was not a day of shouting or breaking glass. It was a day of profound, bottomless silence. The kind of silence that fills a room after a final breath has been taken, heavy and absolute. It was the silence of a tomb, one I hadn't realized I'd been living in for the past 10 years. And in that quiet, the entire foundation of my world, of my family, crumbled to dust. To understand how it happened, you have to understand the man I was before. My name is Arthur, and for 40 years, my life was a partnership. My wife, Laura, was the anchor of my world. I was a builder. I started with a hammer, a bag of nails, and a beat-up truck. Over the decades, I built a successful construction company, not through brilliant financial wizardry, but through sweat, honesty, and the simple principle of doing a job right. I built houses, commercial buildings, things that would stand long after I was gone. I understood concrete, steel, and wood. I understood the language of blueprints and the satisfaction of a hard day's work. Laura, she understood the other side of it. She was the one who managed the books, who made the investments, who turned my hard work into a secure future. She had a sharp mind for numbers and a gentle hand with our savings. "This isn't just money, Arthur," she would say, tapping a ledger with her pen. "This is our time. This is our security. This is for the kids." We had 2 children, Alex and Emily, and for Laura, everything we built was for them. When I lost her to a sudden illness, it was like the sun had been extinguished from my sky. The world went from vibrant color to a muted, painful gray. The company I had built felt like a hollow shell. The house we had shared felt cavernous and cold. I was adrift in a sea of grief, and the practicalities of life were a language I no longer spoke. The finances, the portfolios, the accounts Laura had so meticulously managed, they were like ancient texts written in a forgotten script. Alex, my son, stepped in. He had always been the smart one. He had the business degree, the sharp suits, the confident way of speaking about markets and yields that always made my head spin. He came to my house a month after the funeral, his face a mask of practiced concern. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, where Laura and I had shared thousands of meals. "Dad," he began, his voice soft, "I know this is hard. I can't imagine what you're going through, but we need to think about the future. Mom handled everything, and you have enough on your plate just getting through the day. Let me take care of the finances. Let me manage the estate. It's what Mom would have wanted." He sounded so reasonable, so capable. He was my son. In my grief-stricken state, his offer felt like a lifeline. The thought of sorting through those papers, of making decisions I didn't understand, was overwhelming. It was a burden I was desperate to shed. I saw not a man, but the little boy I had taught to ride a bike, the teenager I had helped with his homework. I saw my son offering to help his grieving father. "Are you sure, Alex?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "It's a lot to take on." He smiled, a reassuring, confident smile that I would one day come to see as a predator's grin. "Of course, Dad. It's my duty. It's my honor. I'll make sure you're taken care of for the rest of your life. You won't have to worry about a single thing." And so, I did it. I went with him to the lawyer's office, my signature a shaky scrawl on the documents that gave him durable power of attorney. I handed over the login information for the investment accounts. I gave him complete and total control over the fortune that Laura and I had spent a lifetime building. It was the single greatest mistake of my life, an act of trust that would cost me more than just money. It would cost me my past, my present, and very nearly my future. I handed my son the keys to the kingdom, and he, in turn, began the slow, methodical process of burning it to the ground. The first few years were subtle. The arrangement seemed to work exactly as Alex had promised. He set up a direct deposit into my personal checking account, a monthly allowance, as he cheerfully called it. It was enough for my modest needs. I didn't live an extravagant life. I had my house, my truck, my small workshop in the garage where I still enjoyed woodworking. I paid my bills, bought my groceries, and puttered around in my garden. I didn't need much. When I asked Alex how the investments were doing, his answers were always vague, but positive. "Everything's on track, Dad. The portfolio is performing well. We're in a good position." He would use terms like diversification and market volatility, words designed to sound impressive and end the conversation. I trusted him. Why wouldn't I? He was my son. He was protecting my interests. The first red flag, though I didn't recognize it as such at the time, was his wife, Chloe. She had always been ambitious, with a taste for the finer things that seemed to outpace Alex's salary as a mid-level manager at some tech firm. But after Alex took control of my finances, their lifestyle began to change dramatically. It started with a new car for her, a gleaming white Lexus SUV. A company bonus, Alex explained when I mentioned it. I had a really good quarter. I nodded, happy for his success. I wanted my children to be successful. Then came the designer handbags Chloe would carry when they came for their increasingly infrequent visits. The expensive watches that appeared on Alex's wrist. Their vacations became more exotic. They went from weekends at the lake to 2-week trips to Tuscany and Bali, posting glossy, curated photos on social media. My daughter, Emily, a quiet and compassionate soul who worked as a schoolteacher in another state, mentioned it to me on the phone once. They seem to be doing really well for themselves, she said, a note of confusion in her voice. Chloe's new ring looks like it cost more than my car. Alex is a smart man, I replied, a reflexive defense of my son. He's good with money. How ironic those words would sound to me later. The condescension started to creep in around year 4 or 5. My simple, frugal life became a source of amusement for them. I remember one Christmas, I had given Chloe a beautiful hand-carved jewelry box I had spent weeks making in my workshop. She opened it, gave a tight, polite smile, and said, "Oh, how rustic." Later, I overheard her whispering to Alex in the hallway, "Where am I supposed to put this? It doesn't match anything." Alex's comments were more direct, disguised as concern. "Dad, you know you could afford a new truck. This old thing is a rust bucket." Or, "Why don't you let us hire a decorator for you? This place is stuck in the 80s. They saw my contentment as a lack of ambition, my frugality as a sign of dotage. They treated me like a relic, a kindly but clueless old man, whose only remaining function was to provide the fuel for their lavish lives. I never fought back. I absorbed the little digs and the patronizing tones, because confrontation was never my way. And deep down, a part of me felt a strange sort of guilt. I had all this money sitting there, money I wasn't really using. Maybe they deserved to enjoy some of it. It was a twisted logic, born of my desire to see my son happy and my own discomfort with the wealth Laura had so carefully accumulated. The breaking point, the moment the first real crack appeared in the facade, came on the occasion of my 70th birthday. Emily had flown in to surprise me. She and I had always been close, sharing a quiet bond that was different from my relationship with Alex. She had Laura's gentle heart. Over dinner, Emily announced that she and her husband were finally in a position to buy their first home. They had saved for years, but the market was tough, and they were still short on the down payment. She was telling me this not to ask for money, but just sharing her life with me. A thought sparked in my mind, a genuine moment of paternal joy. I could help her. This is what the money was for. This was the legacy Laura had wanted. "How much do you need, sweetie?" I asked. She looked surprised. "Oh, Dad, no, I wasn't asking." "I know you weren't, but I want to. This is what your mother and I worked for, to help you kids build your own lives." We talked it over, and the figure came to about $50,000. It was a significant sum, but I knew the estate was worth many millions. It was a drop in the bucket. The next day, I called Alex. I was excited. I told him the good news about Emily and her new house. "Isn't it wonderful?" I said. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Yeah, Dad, that's great for her." His voice was flat, devoid of the enthusiasm I expected. "So," I continued, "I want to give her the money for the down payment, $50,000. Can you arrange the transfer?" The silence that followed was heavy and cold. "50,000, he finally said, his voice tight. "Dad, I don't think that's a good idea right now." I was taken aback. "What do you mean? It's for Emily. It's for her first home." "The market has been volatile," he said, the familiar jargon appearing like a shield. "We've had to reallocate some assets. A withdrawal of that size would trigger a significant capital gains tax. It's just not a fiscally responsible move at this moment. His words were a confusing jumble, but his tone was perfectly clear. It was dismissive. Final. "Alex," I said, my own voice firming up, "it's my money. I want to give my daughter a gift." "And as the manager of that money," he shot back, his voice losing its patient veneer, "I'm advising you against it. Strongly. You have to think about your long-term care, Dad. We can't just be throwing chunks of cash around irresponsibly." Irresponsibly? Helping my daughter was irresponsible? Something inside me bristled. "This is not a debate, Alex. This is what I want to do. It's a gift for your sister." Then came the line that would echo in my mind for months. "Look, Dad," he sighed, the sound a perfect blend of frustration and condescension. "You don't understand how these things work. Just let me handle it. I'll see if we can maybe free up a smaller amount later in the year as a wedding anniversary gift or something. But 50,000 is out of the question." He wasn't advising me. He was telling me. He wasn't my son helping his father. He was a fund manager denying a client's request. A profound humiliation washed over me. I was a child being told no by a stern parent. I was a 70-year-old man being told I could not use my own money to help my own daughter. "I see," I said, my voice cold and distant. I didn't argue further. I couldn't. The shock and shame were too great. I ended the call. I sat there in my armchair, the phone resting in my lap, the silence of the house pressing in on me. I looked at the photograph of Laura on the mantelpiece, her smile so full of life and love. We had built an empire of two, a legacy of security and opportunity for our children. And now, I was being told I couldn't access it. The excuses he gave felt thin, like worn-out fabric. Market volatility, capital gains. He had said the portfolio was doing well for years. It didn't add up. And the tone, the cold, dismissive finality in his voice. It wasn't concern, it was control. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the conversation over and over. Every word, every inflection. The disrespect was a physical ache in my chest. It was a betrayal, not just of me, but of Emily, and of the fundamental promise Laura and I had made to our family. Sometime in the dark, quiet hours before dawn, a decision formed in my mind. It wasn't a loud, angry resolution. It was a cold, quiet, and absolute certainty. It settled into my bones like winter ice. I would find out the truth. I didn't know how, and I didn't know what I would find, but the time for blind trust was over. The time for playing the part of the docile, ignorant old man was at an end. I would find out what was happening to my money. I would reclaim what was mine. It was a quiet decision, made alone in the dark, but it was as solid and unshakable as the foundations I had spent my life building. The next day, I had to call Emily and tell her I couldn't help with the down payment just yet. It was one of the most difficult calls I've ever had to make. I couldn't tell her the truth. I couldn't bear to plant a seed of suspicion against her own brother. So I lied. I mumbled something about a temporary issue with the accounts, echoing Alex's excuses. "Oh, Dad, please don't worry about it," she said, her voice full of genuine concern for me. "Really, we'll be fine. We were never expecting it. The thought was the gift." Her kindness was like a knife in my heart. She was being denied her inheritance by her brother's greed, and here she was, comforting me. The injustice of it all hardened my resolve into something akin to steel. My first step was to play the part Alex had cast for me. When he called a week later, his tone back to its usual cheerful condescension, I was meek. "You were right, son," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "I guess I just got carried away. You know best." "It's okay, Dad," he said, and I could almost hear the smug satisfaction in his voice. "That's what I'm here for, to look out for you." By feigning acceptance, I created distance. I stopped asking questions about the money. I made my life smaller, more contained. I let him believe he had won, that the old man had been put back in his box. His calls became less frequent. His guard went down completely. He was an emperor who believed his own myth of invincibility, and I was the ghost in the machine, quietly observing, waiting. During this time, alone in my quiet house, the past came flooding back. It's strange how memory works. You live your life, and events just happen. But when you look back through the lens of a new, terrible knowledge, everything is rearranged. A mosaic of seemingly random tiles suddenly forms a chilling picture. I remembered a time when Alex was in college. He'd called me, frantic. He had run up a credit card debt of a few $1,000s on what he called unexpected expenses. Laura and I paid it off, assuming it was a youthful mistake. He had been so grateful, so apologetic. Now I saw it not as a mistake, but as an early experiment, a test to see how easily he could get money with a well-told story. I recalled a family vacation years ago when the kids were still teenagers. We were at a resort, and a wallet went missing from the room next to ours. A big fuss was made. The wallet was later found, but the cash was gone. Alex had been unusually quiet that afternoon, and later he bought an expensive souvenir he claimed he'd saved up for. At the time, I couldn't have imagined connecting the two events. Now, the memory sent a shiver down my spine. I thought about his wedding to Chloe. They had insisted on a lavish affair, far beyond what they could reasonably afford. Laura and I had contributed a generous amount, but they had complained it wasn't enough. I remember Alex saying, "We only get one wedding. It should be perfect." It wasn't about the celebration of love. It was about the performance of wealth. These memories, and dozens more like them, coalesced into a portrait of my son that I had refused to see. He wasn't just ambitious. He was pathologically entitled. He saw the world not in terms of relationships and duties, but in terms of assets and opportunities. I was no longer his father. I was his largest asset. Laura's legacy wasn't a sacred trust. It was a resource to be exploited. The grief I felt was immense, a second mourning. I had lost my wife, and now I was realizing I had also lost my son, long before I ever signed those papers. My grief, however, was quickly being eclipsed by a cold, burning anger. I needed proof. I needed to see the numbers for myself. But how? Alex had changed all the passwords and login credentials. I was locked out of my own financial life. For weeks, I felt helpless, trapped. Then, one afternoon, I was cleaning out the old roll-top desk in my study, a beautiful piece of furniture that had belonged to my own father. It was full of Laura's things, papers and files I hadn't had the heart to touch since she passed. In a dusty, forgotten corner of a lower drawer, my fingers brushed against a thin folder. The label on it, in Laura's neat cursive, read, "Midland Bank, Contingency Account." My heart started to pound. I didn't remember this account. Laura must have set it up years ago. She was always one for planning, for having a backup to the backup. I opened the folder. Inside was a single, decade-old bank statement and a welcome letter. It was a simple checking account, opened in both our names. I remembered it vaguely now. It was a rainy day fund we had opened with a small inheritance she had received and then promptly forgotten about. The crucial detail was the bank. It wasn't the main investment bank Alex used. It was a smaller, local institution. Had Alex known about it? Had he consolidated it with the rest of the funds? Or had it, like me, been forgotten? The next morning, I drove to the main branch of Midland Bank. My hands were trembling as I walked through the glass doors. I felt like a criminal sneaking around behind my own son's back. I sat down with a personal banker, a pleasant woman in her 50s named Mrs. Gable. "How can I help you, Mr. Peterson?" she asked with a warm smile. I have an account here," I stammered, sliding the old statement across the desk. "My wife and I opened it years ago. I'm afraid I've lost track of it." She typed my name into her computer. "Ah, yes, I see it. Arthur and Laura Peterson. I'm very sorry for your loss, Mr. Peterson. I see your wife's name was removed from the account 10 years ago." "Yes," I said, my throat tight. "That's right." "The account is still active," she continued. "It looks like your son, Alex Peterson, was added as a signatory with power of attorney at the same time." My heart sank. Of course. He had been thorough. "I see," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I seem to have misplaced all my recent statements. I've been letting my son handle these things. Could I possibly get a printout of the account history, for my records, say, for the last 10 years? "Of course," she said, tapping at her keyboard. "That will be quite a bit of paper. It might take a few minutes to print." Those were the longest 10 minutes of my life. I sat there, trying to appear calm, my mind racing. What would I find? Would it just be a dormant account, confirming my fears were baseless paranoia? Or would it be something else? Mrs. Gable returned with a thick stack of papers, nearly an inch high, and placed it on the desk between us. Here you are, Mr. Peterson, the full history starting 10 years ago. I thanked her, my voice hoarse. I couldn't bring myself to look at it in the bank. I needed to be home. I drove back in a daze, the stack of papers sitting on the passenger seat like a bomb. Back at my kitchen table, the same table where Alex had made his false promises, I took a deep breath and looked at the first page. The opening balance was what I expected, around $25,000. For the first few months, the account was dormant, and then it began. The first transaction was an incoming wire transfer, a very large one, $250,000. It was from the main investment account, the one Alex managed. My eyes scanned down. A few days later, there was an outgoing wire transfer for the exact same amount to a title company. I stared at it, my blood running cold. I remembered that time. It was about 9 years ago. Alex and Chloe had bought their first house, a beautiful big colonial in a gated community. They had told me they got a very favorable mortgage. There was no mortgage. It was my money. I flipped through the pages, my hands shaking so badly I could barely read the numbers. It was a pattern, repeated over and over again. Large sums of money would be transferred from the main investment account into this contingency account, and then immediately transferred out to a third party. It was a laundromat, a way to move money without it showing up on the main investment statements. He occasionally, and very selectively, showed me. I saw a transfer for $75,000 to a luxury car dealership, Chloe's Lexus. I saw tens of thousands of dollars wired to high-end travel agencies, their trips to Tuscany and Bali. I saw payments to jewelers, to exclusive country clubs, to designer clothing stores. Page after page, year after year, it was a meticulous record of a decade-long plunder. My life's work, my wife's legacy, being siphoned off to fund a lifestyle of grotesque, unearned luxury. He wasn't just managing my money. He was systematically, callously, and expertly stealing it. I started a rough tally on a notepad, my handwriting barely legible. The numbers climbed at a sickening rate. 500,000, 800,000, a million. When I got to the final page, the final transfer, made just a few months ago, my pen hovered over the paper. I did the final calculation. $1,327,451. The number just sat there on the page. $1.3 million. I leaned back in my chair, the paper spread out before me like the wreckage of a plane crash. The silence in the room was absolute. The pain in my chest wasn't the sharp sting of betrayal anymore. It was a vast, hollow emptiness. The son I loved, the boy I had raised, did not exist. In his place was a stranger, a thief who wore his face. The discovery didn't break me. It forged me. The grief and shock and shame were burned away in a flash, replaced by something I hadn't felt in decades, a cold, pure, righteous fury. This was not just about the money. This was about a decade of lies. It was about the desecration of Laura's memory. It was about the smirking condescension and the feigned concern. My mission, which had been a vague notion, was now crystal clear. I wasn't just getting my money back. I was going to take back my life. I was going to dismantle the fraudulent world my son had built on my back, piece by piece, until nothing was left but the ugly truth. The quiet old man was gone. In his place was a builder, and I was about to lay the foundation for my son's ruin. The stack of bank statements was my bedrock. It was tangible, undeniable proof. But I knew it wasn't enough. Alex was slippery. He would have excuses, explanations, a storm of financial jargon designed to confuse and intimidate. I needed more than just raw data. I needed a weapon, and I needed someone who knew how to wield it. I spent the next 2 days in a state of controlled, methodical action. My grief was a fire banked low, radiating a steady, determined heat. I went online and researched top financial litigation firms in the city. I wasn't looking for a family lawyer who would mediate a gentle reconciliation. I was looking for a shark. I made a list of 3 firms, and on the 3rd day, I started making calls. The first 2 were dismissive. A junior associate listened to a brief version of my story and promised a partner would call me back, a call that never came. They probably pictured a confused old man with a family squabble. The third firm was different. The woman who answered the phone listened patiently, and when I finished, she said, "Please hold for Sarah Jenkins. She's the head of our forensic litigation department. I think she'll want to hear this herself." A moment later, a new voice came on the line. It was crisp, clear, and radiated an intelligence that was immediately reassuring. "Mr. Peterson, this is Sarah Jenkins. Tell me everything from the beginning, and don't leave anything out." For the next hour, I told her the entire story. The death of my wife, my grief, the power of attorney, the condescension, the denied gift to my daughter, and finally, the discovery of the bank statements. I spoke without emotion, laying out the facts as if I were describing a construction project. When I was finished, there was a moment of silence. "Mr. Peterson," she said, and her voice had a new edge to it, a cold anger on my behalf. "Your son hasn't just been a bad steward of your money. He has committed felony grand larceny, wire fraud, and likely several other financial crimes. What he has done is monstrous." Hearing it stated so baldly by a professional, a stranger, validated everything I was feeling. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't overreacting. I was a victim of a massive, long-term crime. "Can you help me?" I asked. "Help you?" she replied. "Mr. Peterson, we are going to do more than help you. We are going to conduct a full forensic audit that will trace every single penny. We will build a case so ironclad that your son will have no choice but to capitulate completely. Can you come to my office tomorrow morning at 9 and bring the statements?" The next morning, I walked into a high-rise office building downtown, the thick stack of papers in my briefcase. It felt like the first day of a new life. Sarah Jenkins was in her late 40s, with sharp eyes and an air of absolute competence. She didn't offer platitudes or sympathy. She offered a plan. We sat in a conference room with a forensic accountant she had on retainer, a man named David, who looked like he could find a missing decimal point in a hurricane. I laid the statements on the polished mahogany table. For the next 3 hours, David went through them, page by page, his pen flying across a legal pad. Sarah and I just watched. Finally, David looked up. "It's brazen," he said, shaking his head in disbelief. He used this Midland account as a simple pass-through. He was sloppy. He must have believed you would never, ever look. He made no effort to hide the destination of the funds. The car dealership, the title company, the travel agencies. It's all right here. We can subpoena their records and match every one of these transfers to a purchase made in his or his wife's name. Sarah looked at me. "This is our path forward. David will conduct a full secret audit. He'll create a comprehensive report that documents the theft down to the last dollar. While he does that, my team will prepare a civil complaint and a criminal referral. We will assemble everything, and then, when we are ready, we will confront him. We will give him one chance, and one chance only, to make this right." "What does making it right look like?" I asked. "It looks like the immediate return of every single asset," she said, her voice like flint. "He will sign over the house, the cars, any remaining cash. He will liquidate any investments he made with your money. He will sign a legal confession of his crimes, and he will agree to a repayment plan for any amount that cannot be immediately recovered with interest. In return for his full and immediate cooperation, you will agree not to press criminal charges. If he hesitates, if he argues, if he so much as breathes a word of protest, we file the criminal complaint that same day. He will be arrested, he will be prosecuted, and with this evidence, he will go to prison for a very long time." The thought of my own son in prison sent a pang of something through me, the last vestige of a father's instinct, but it was quickly extinguished by the memory of his cold voice on the phone, denying his sister a home. "Do it," I said. "Prepare everything." The next few weeks were the strangest of my life. I was living a double life. On the surface, nothing had changed. I worked in my garden. I tinkered in my workshop. I spoke to Alex on the phone once a week. The calls were excruciating. I had to listen to him talk about his golf game or a new restaurant he and Chloe had tried, knowing it was all funded by my stolen money. I had to play the part of the slightly befuddled, gentle old father. "How are things, Dad? Keeping busy?" he'd ask, his voice dripping with false bonhomie. Oh, same old, I'd reply, my heart pounding with the effort of keeping my voice even. Every word was a lie, a carefully placed stone in the wall of deception I was building around him. His overconfidence was my greatest ally. He had no idea the ground beneath his feet was about to give way. Meanwhile, in secret, my team was assembling an arsenal. David, the accountant, worked tirelessly. He delivered weekly updates to Sarah, who would then call me. The numbers were staggering. The $1.3 million I had calculated was just the beginning. David found more, siphoned from other accounts, hidden in complex transactions Alex thought were too clever to be untangled. The final tally was closer to $1.5 million. Sarah's team drafted the legal documents. A confession that ran for 20 pages, detailing every fraudulent transfer, agreements to sign over the deed to his house, the titles to the cars, a civil complaint so detailed and damning it read like a script for a true crime documentary. I made a decision during this time not to tell my daughter, Emily. I didn't want to burden her with this knowledge until it was over. I didn't want her to experience the same pain of betrayal I was going through. This was my battle to fight. I was her father. It was my job to protect her, even from the truth, for a little while longer. After a month of intense clandestine work, Sarah called me. "We're ready, Arthur," she said. Her use of my first name felt significant, a shift from a professional relationship to one of alliance. "We have everything. The report is undeniable. The legal documents are prepared. It's time to set the trap." The plan was simple and brilliant in its manipulation of Alex's own greed. I was to call him and tell him I wanted to have a meeting to discuss my will and long-term estate planning. I would tell him my lawyer, Sarah, had some ideas about creating a trust that would be more tax efficient and would give him more control in the future. The bait was perfect. The promise of cementing his control over the remainder of the estate, of making his future inheritance even more secure, was something he would be unable to resist. We would hold the meeting in Sarah's conference room, neutral ground, my territory. I made the call that afternoon. My heart was a cold, heavy stone in my chest, but my voice was steady. "Alex," I began, "I've been doing some thinking about the future, about the estate. I met with a lawyer, and she has some thoughts on how to structure things. I'd like you and Chloe to come meet with us next week." "A lawyer?" he asked, a flicker of suspicion in his voice. "Dad, you should have talked to me first. I have people who handle this." "I know, son," I said, playing my part. "But she was recommended by a friend. She seems very sharp. She's talking about setting up a trust that could save us a lot in taxes down the road. It sounds like it would make things easier for you to manage." The suspicion in his voice vanished, replaced by acquisitive interest. "A trust? Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Who is she? Where's her office?" I gave him Sarah's name and address. "Next Tuesday at 10 in the morning?" "Yeah, we can make that work," he said, his tone now eager. "Good thinking, Dad. Proactive. I like it." When I hung up the phone, I felt a profound sense of grim finality. The trap was set. The date was marked on the calendar. In 1 week, my son would walk into that conference room expecting to tighten his grip on my fortune. Instead, he would find himself in a cage of his own making, and I would be the one holding the key. The week leading up to the meeting was a blur of tension and anticipation. I slept little, my mind a constant loop of potential scenarios. What if he bolted? What if he turned violent? I trusted Sarah's plan, but the thought of confronting my own son in such a calculated, brutal way was profoundly unsettling. This wasn't just a legal maneuver, it was the amputation of a part of my own life. The morning of the meeting, I dressed with deliberate care. I put on my best suit, a conservative gray one that I'd had for years. It was the suit I had worn to Laura's funeral. There was a somber poetry in that which felt appropriate. I was burying something else today, the ghost of the son I thought I had. I arrived at Sarah's office an hour early. She and David were already there, the conference room prepared like a theater of war. On the large mahogany table, there were only 3 things: a bottle of water for me, a single slim folder in front of Sarah's chair, and a thick, bound document in front of David's. The rest of the table was empty, a vast, intimidating space. "Are you ready for this, Arthur?" Sarah asked, her gaze steady and serious. I took a deep breath, the air conditioning cold against my skin. "I'm not sure anyone can be ready for this," I said honestly, "but it has to be done." David, the accountant, gave me a grim nod. "The evidence is absolute. There is no ambiguity. Remember that." We sat in silence, waiting. The minutes ticked by like hours. At exactly 10 o'clock, the receptionist buzzed Sarah. "Mr. and Mrs. Peterson are here to see you." "Send them in," Sarah said, her voice calm and controlled. A moment later, the door opened and they walked in. Alex and Chloe. They were a portrait of entitled success. He was wearing a suit that was far more expensive than mine, an ostentatious watch on his wrist. Chloe was dressed in a chic designer dress, carrying a handbag that probably cost more than my monthly allowance. They looked around the conference room, their expressions a mixture of impatience and appraisal. "Dad," Alex said, walking over to me. He clapped me on the shoulder, a gesture of performative affection that made my skin crawl. "Good to see you. This is your lawyer, Sarah?" He extended a hand to her, a confident, practiced smile on his face. Sarah did not smile back. She shook his hand briefly. "Mr. Peterson, please, have a seat." She gestured to the two empty chairs across the vast table from us. Chloe sat down with a little huff, placing her expensive bag on the chair beside her. "So," Alex began, leaning forward with an air of taking charge, "Dad tells me you have some ideas about estate planning. I handle all of Dad's finances, so you can just run it by me. We're always looking for ways to optimize the tax situation." He spoke as if I weren't even in the room. Sarah let the silence hang in the air for a moment before she spoke. Her voice, when it came, was quiet, but it cut through the room like a shard of ice. "Actually, Mr. Peterson, that's not why we're here today. We're here to discuss a series of unauthorized fund transfers totaling $1,482,900 that you have systematically misappropriated from your father's accounts over the past 10 years. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. It was as if a vacuum had sucked all the air and noise from the room. Alex's confident smile didn't just vanish. It was wiped clean from his face, leaving behind a slack-jawed, stunned expression. His eyes darted from Sarah to me and back again. Chloe's perfectly made-up face froze, her mouth slightly agape. What?" Alex stammered, the first crack in his composure. "What are you talking about? That's insane. That's slander." Sarah didn't respond to him. Instead, she slowly opened the slim folder in front of her. She slid a single piece of paper across the polished table. It stopped directly in front of him. "This is a summary of a wire transfer from your father's main investment account to a contingency account at Midland Bank, and then a subsequent transfer on the same day to Westgate Title Company for the purchase of your primary residence." Alex stared at the paper, his face turning pale. He looked at me, a desperate, confused look in his eyes. "Dad, what is this? This is a mistake." I said nothing. I just met his gaze, my expression a cold, blank wall. There was no fatherly love there for him to appeal to. There was nothing. Sarah slid another piece of paper across the table. "This is the transfer to European Luxury Imports for the purchase of a Lexus SUV registered in your wife's name." She looked at Chloe for the first time. Chloe flinched as if she had been struck. Another piece of paper. "This is a transfer to a jeweler for the purchase of a 3-carat diamond engagement ring." Another. "This is a wire to the Azure Seas Country Club for your membership initiation fee." Page after page, Sarah calmly slid the evidence of his betrayal across the table. Each one was a nail being hammered into the coffin of his lies. With each new sheet of paper, Alex seemed to shrink in his chair. The color had completely drained from his face, leaving it a pasty, sickly white. Chloe was breathing in short, shallow gasps, her eyes wide with panic. The power shift in the room was a physical force. It was palpable. The arrogant, confident couple who had walked in just minutes before had been replaced by two cornered, terrified animals. The vast, empty space on the table between us now felt like an unbridgeable chasm. They were on one side, isolated in their guilt, and we were on the other, holding all the cards. The silence that had been broken by Sarah's methodical accusations returned, but this time it was different. It was the silence of judgment. This is a misunderstanding, Alex finally choked out, his voice a hoarse whisper. His bravado was completely gone, replaced by a desperate, panicked denial. These were fees, expenses, market adjustments. You don't understand the complexities of... Oh, I think we do. David, the accountant, spoke for the first time. His voice was deep and resonant. He pushed the thick, bound document forward. This is a full forensic audit of every account you had access to. It details every dollar you stole, every transfer, every purchase, every lie. It is irrefutable. We have bank records, credit card statements, and vendor invoices. There is no complexity here, Mr. Peterson. Only theft. Simple, straightforward, and very, very thorough. Alex stared at the thick report as if it were a venomous snake. The finality in David's voice seemed to break something inside him. His shoulders slumped. He looked at me, his eyes swimming with tears. The mask of the sophisticated financier was gone, and in his place was a terrified boy. "Dad," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "Dad, please, don't do this. We can talk about this. Just us." Chloe, seeing her husband crumble, found her voice, and it was shrill with panic. "What do you want? Money? Is that it? You want to ruin us? Your own son? After everything we've done for you?" "Done for me?" The words escaped my lips before I could stop them, cold and quiet. It was the first time I had spoken. The sound of my own voice seemed to startle them. Sarah took control again, her tone leaving no room for negotiation. "Here are your options," she said, her voice like steel. "Option 1. You will both sign a full legal confession of your crimes. You will sign over the deed to your house, the titles to both of your vehicles, and you will liquidate every investment and savings account you have with the funds to be transferred directly to your father. Right now, you will then agree to a legally binding repayment schedule for the remaining balance of what you stole. In return, your father will agree not to forward our criminal complaint to the district attorney's office." She paused, letting the weight of the offer settle in the room. "Option 2. You refuse. You walk out of this room, and my associate will file this criminal complaint and this civil lawsuit before you reach the lobby. The police will likely be at your home by dinner time. Given the amount of money and the duration of the fraud, you will be facing significant jail time. Your assets will be frozen and eventually seized anyway. You will lose everything, and you will go to prison." Chloe let out a strangled sob. She turned to Alex. "Do something," she hissed. "Don't just sit there." Alex was completely broken. He stared at me, his face a mess of tears and desperation. "Dad," he begged, his voice a child's whine. "Dad, I'm your son. You can't send me to prison. I'm sorry, okay? I'm so sorry. It just got out of control. I always meant to pay it back, I swear." The lies, even now. The pathetic, self-serving lies. I looked at him, at this stranger who had my son's face, and I felt nothing. The well of fatherly affection had run dry, leaving nothing but a barren, rocky landscape of betrayal. I leaned forward slightly, and the room was so quiet that my voice, though barely above a whisper, seemed to boom like a cannon. "You didn't just steal money, Alex," I said, meeting his terrified gaze. "You stole my trust. You stole your sister's future. You stood on your mother's grave and you danced. This is not a negotiation. This is a reckoning." The last bit of hope died in his eyes. He slumped in his chair, a puppet with its strings cut. He looked at Chloe, whose face was a mask of furious disbelief, and then back at the papers. He knew he was beaten, utterly and completely. "Give us the papers," he whispered, his voice thick with defeat. Sarah pushed a stack of documents and 2 pens across the table. For the next 30 minutes, the only sound in the room was the scratching of pens on paper and Chloe's quiet, choked sobs. They signed the confession. They signed over the deed to the house they had stolen from me. They signed over the titles to the cars. Sarah had a laptop ready, and with David's guidance, Alex logged into his bank and investment accounts and, with trembling fingers, initiated the transfers, emptying his entire financial life into a holding account Sarah had established. When it was all done, they just sat there, hollowed out. They had walked in as masters of their universe, and they would walk out with nothing but the clothes on their backs and a mountain of debt to a few remaining credit cards. "We're done here," Sarah said, her voice devoid of any triumph. She stood up. "An associate will show you out." Alex didn't move. He just stared at me. "Dad," he began one last time. "Goodbye, Alex," I said, and I turned my head to look out the window at the city skyline. I would not give him the satisfaction of seeing my face again. I heard them stand. I heard Chloe's muffled cry. I heard the door open and close, and then there was silence. The same profound, absolute silence that had started this journey. But this time, it wasn't the silence of a tomb. It was the silence of a battlefield after the war has been won. After the door closed behind them, the strength that had held me together for weeks finally abandoned me. I slumped in my chair, the rigid posture I had maintained completely dissolving. A deep, shuddering breath escaped my lungs, a sound somewhere between a sob and a sigh. The adrenaline drained away, leaving behind a profound exhaustion and a deep, aching sadness. I put my head in my hands, and for the first time since this whole ordeal began, I wept. They were not tears of victory. They were tears of grief. Grief for the son I had lost, for the family that was now irrevocably broken. Grief for the 10 years of my life I had spent in a fool's paradise, being preyed upon by my own child. Sarah and David remained silent, allowing me the space for my sorrow. After a few moments, I felt a gentle hand on my shoulder. It was Sarah. "You did the right thing, Arthur," she said softly. "It was the hardest thing, but it was the right thing." I looked up, wiping my eyes. "What happens to them now?" "Now," David said, gathering the signed documents, "the consequences begin. The house will be put on the market immediately. The proceeds will go to you. The cars will be sold. They have no money. Their credit is ruined. They have legally confessed to multiple felonies. They have nothing." The words painted a stark, bleak picture. In the days that followed, I learned the full extent of their downfall. They had to move out of their stolen house within a week, taking only their personal belongings. They had no savings, no assets to fall back on. They were forced to move into a tiny, run-down apartment on the worst side of town. Alex lost his job once his employer caught wind of the situation, the scandal making him unemployable in the financial sector. Chloe's friends, the ones who had admired her wealth and status, abandoned them instantly. They were social pariahs, stripped of the very identity they had stolen to create. About 2 weeks after the meeting, my phone rang. It was a blocked number. I hesitated, then answered. "Dad?" The voice was almost unrecognizable. It was thin, reedy, stripped of all its former confidence. It was the voice of Alex. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice flat. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry," he stammered. "I know it's too late. I know, but I am. We have nothing, Dad. Chloe left me. I'm living in a boarding house. I can't find a job. I was wondering if you could, maybe just a small loan, just to get back on my feet." The audacity of it, even now, after everything, to come back begging for more. The last ember of any lingering pity I might have had for him was extinguished in that moment. He hadn't learned a thing. He was still looking for the easy way out, for someone else to solve his problems. I was silent for a long moment, listening to his pathetic, ragged breathing on the other end of the line. "Goodbye, Alex," I said, and my voice was calm and final. Then I hung up the phone and blocked the number. That door was now closed and locked forever. The weeks turned into months. The house sold quickly, and the money, along with the funds from the liquidated accounts and the sale of the cars, was returned to my name, under my sole control. I hired a new, reputable financial advisor, a woman recommended by Sarah. I sat with her for hours, learning about my own finances. I took control. The language of the market, once so intimidating, began to make sense. I was no longer a passenger in my own life. I was behind the wheel. I called Emily and told her everything. It was a long, painful conversation. She cried, not for the money she had been denied, but for the brother she had lost, and the pain I had endured alone. The truth, as hard as it was, brought us closer. The first thing I did after securing my finances was to write her a check. Not for 50,000, but for 100,000. Buy a home you love, I told her. Make a life for yourself. That is your mother's legacy. My house, once a place of quiet grief and then silent rage, slowly began to feel like a home again. I cleared out the lingering shadows of the past. I painted the walls. I bought new furniture. I spent more time in my workshop, the scent of sawdust and wood stain a comforting balm. The work of my hands, creating something real and tangible and honest, felt more valuable than any stock certificate. I stand here now, a year later, in my quiet, peaceful home. The money is just a number in an account again. It's secure, it's safe, but it's not what I won back. What I reclaimed was so much more valuable. I reclaimed my dignity. I reclaimed my self-respect. I reclaimed my own strength. The betrayal of a child is a unique and profound kind of wound. It strikes at the very core of your being, at the natural order of the world. It makes you question every memory, every act of love, every moment of trust. It leaves a scar that never truly fades. But I have learned that you do not have to be defined by your wounds. You can let the betrayal consume you, turning you into a bitter, broken person. Or you can use the pain as fuel. You can fight to reclaim not just what was taken from you, but who you are. I was a builder my whole life, and in the end, I had to undertake one last, difficult project. I had to rebuild myself. I often look at the photo of Laura on my mantelpiece. For a long time after this was all over, I felt a sense of failure, as if I had let her down by allowing our life's work to be squandered. But I don't feel that way anymore. I feel that, in the end, I honored her. I fought for the principles she held dear: honesty, integrity, and the protection of our family's future. I righted a terrible wrong. Trust is a fragile and precious gift. It is given freely, built over years of shared love and experience. But when it is shattered by the one person in the world you believed never could, you are faced with a stark choice. You can collapse under the weight of the wreckage, or you can start sorting through the rubble, salvaging what is true and strong, and building something new from the ruins. I chose to build. And in the quiet peace that followed the storm, I found not vengeance or victory, but something far more lasting. I found myself,